Staying in shelters versus tents. It's gonna be pretty one-sided, to be honest, because staying in shelters sucks. Hi, my name is Julianne, also known as Roadrunner, and in 2022 I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, and as most of you know, I really don't enjoy staying in shelters, but I thought today we could talk about shelter versus tents and what are some benefits and some not so great things about staying in either of them. Before I even go into the pros or the cons of either, I do want to go ahead and thank all the trail maintainers and the trail volunteers for even creating shelters, because without shelters we wouldn't have shelter from the elements, and the whole idea of a shelter was an amazing concept, and so thank you to all those that have spent their time making and building them. There are some really beautiful shelters in Pennsylvania in particular, and just recently the Appalachian Trail has an updated shelter at Rock Gap near Franklin, North Carolina. So check that one out. It is absolutely gorgeous. So the obvious benefit of a shelter is a shelter. A shelter is a three-walled structure made out of wood that protects you from the elements such as wind, rain, snow, and also hail. So I cannot imagine being in a tent when it is extremely windy and having my little flimsy tent fly all over the place. And I know I'm gonna have a subscriber tell me that his tent was able to sustain to 80 miles wind an hour, but me personally, I don't really want to risk that. So if there is crazy wind, I probably would prefer being in a shelter. The same goes for hail. I was lucky enough when I was doing my thru hike not to have to deal with any hail, but I wouldn't want to be in a tent that is made out of sil nylon or even Dyneema to have some rocks come from the sky and crush me. In addition to the whole wind concept, we're not even talking about just like making your tent fly away and you're being affected by the wind. We're also talking about the debris that are coming off the trees. I personally would prefer not to be crushed by a widowmaker or any sort of limb coming from the sky. And so again, a shelter is a great protection from extreme winds and debris and things flying all over the place. The other really great thing about shelters is that they do contribute to the leave no trace principle. So leave no trace means that people should go into a place the way they came into it and should go out of it the same way, so as though they've never even been there. And so a shelter is really great for that. Now, even though the shelter itself is not leave no trace, it prevents from hikers setting up their tent in spots that could maybe harm the environment. And so the less tents are set up in that environment, the less impact it will have on the surrounding areas. One more benefit of shelters: usually shelter areas do have privies, which also helps the leave no trace principle, as well as some shelters have fireplaces that keep you extra cozy. And in addition to that, a lot of shelters provide bare hang cables as well as bare boxes as to you being able to store your food. And now we're moving on to why shelters might not be such a great choice and staying in a tent would be much better. And it's not like I'm really hating on a shelter for being a shelter. Again, the concept of a shelter was amazing. The whole idea of it, the concept is perfect, and shelters have saved me personally from rain and cold weather, and so they're such great benefit. It is more so what shelters attract that I want to talk about. Okay, so the first thing when it comes to shelters is that you really don't have your private space. You're not really able to spread out your belongings, because when it is very rainy or very cold, shelters, they do fill up rather quickly, and a lot of times we try to pile ourselves into one shelter and really squeeze ourselves in there. So personal space is very limited. So there you can't really spread out and you would affect other people. In fact, when it's raining, a lot of times other hikers make your stuff wet and you make other hikers' stuff wet. And honestly, that really defeats the purpose of being in a shelter. Again, when you're in a shelter, you don't really have a lot of personal space. So if you do like personal space, being in a tent is much better. Having a 2-person tent, for example, allows you to really spread out your things and have your own space, your own safety haven. I recently posted a video about what kind of people could maybe be in a shelter, for example, and there was a guy, it was a rainy day, he hung his clothes right in front of everybody's face at the entrance of a shelter, and he wouldn't allow other people to hang their stuff as well. So definitely know that you could infringe on people's space as well as they could infringe on your space, and it's not really that pleasant. If you like your peace and quiet, a shelter would probably not be the place to go because hikers do snore. There's a lot of them. And hikers move around their sleeping pad because they're hurting from having walked all day long. So when you're in a shelter, you'll be hearing lots of noises, snoring, moving, and it's really, really difficult to get a good night's rest, which is really something you need when you're hiking. You want to be able to have good sleep so that way you are ready to go the next day. And that's a little bit tough in a shelter. Now, obviously, you can alleviate that with some earplugs. I personally don't like earplugs because they do hurt my ear, as well as some hikers, they snore so loudly that you can feel their vibration of the snore. So again, if you like your peace and quiet, do choose a tent because you can set up your tent a good distance from people that you know that might be a little bit louder, and therefore they wouldn't affect you and you wouldn't affect them, and it's a better choice when it comes to wanting to have a little bit more quiet. In addition to that, you don't really have any freedom when it comes to moving around in a shelter. At point of sundown, that becomes hiker midnight, so we are all expected to be quiet and start sleeping. If you're not interested in wanting to sleep right away, then you know, again, a shelter wouldn't be the right thing because people do want to start sleeping at sundown. In addition, if you have to get up all night long to go to the bathroom, that could impact other hikers. Again, it's not a lot of freedom. And on top of that, if you're an early riser and you want to get up at 3 or 4 a.m. to get hiking, you would wake other hikers up and they'd be not happy people. So being in a tent, once again, allows you to have that freedom. You can get up as early as you want to, pack up your stuff without affecting other people, and just get hiking in the middle of the night. So that is a big benefit of being in a tent versus a shelter. Let's be honest, hikers smell. We just smell. Once we hike, the sweat, the dirt, makes a mixture of incredibly potent stench. So can you imagine having a bunch of hikers in close proximity to each other? A shelter is not the most pleasant place to be when it comes to smells because it just all accumulates in a small amount of space. In addition to that, hiker food is not good for your bodies, so therefore it does create a lot of gases, and I can tell you from personal experience, I stayed in a shelter one time, and I mean, I only stayed at a shelter like 4 or 5 times, but the one time I stayed at a shelter, my stomach did not love me very much, and every time I moved, certain gases came out, and I felt really bad for my fellow hikers. I mean, I did get up in the morning and apologize. Nobody seemed to have been aware of my fun when it comes to the gases that were released. But again, you know, if you know you're gassy, maybe you don't want to be around other people and smell it up even more. And the thing is, like, hiker food just does that. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. So I prefer to be in my tent to not, you know, impact other people with, you know, with farting, honestly. I mean, it's just as easy as that. In this day and age, we do have to consider that being in close proximity to other people can severely impact our health. not only do we prepare for something called norovirus, which is a stomach bug, but we also have to consider COVID. And it's a serious matter, and a lot of hikers do get sick of either norovirus or COVID. So again, having your personal space, being in distance, not touching other people's stuff, not being close enough to them to get sick is recommended. And in a tent, again, you can create the space and distance from other people. When I did my thru hike, I did not get norovirus or COVID. I definitely think that that has to do with me staying in my tent most of the time and not being so close to other people. And where there's a lot of people, there's a lot of food. And when there's a lot of food, there are a lot of critters. Yes, shelters attract critters, and we're talking about mice and rats right now. So it is not unusual to have hikers talk about mice gnawing on their packs, their quills, and sometimes running over their faces or feet. So shelters unfortunately attract those kind of critters because people do eat in shelters and then decide to sleep in it. Little pieces of crumbs and smells remain, and it's just inevitable for critters to come along. And so being in a tent can alleviate that. Hanging your food bag up, making sure you don't have crumbs left can help. Now, I have heard of some hikers who said that mice try to eat through their tent to get into it. But again, you can alleviate that by not having any food inside of your tent. And personally, I've never experienced a mouse or a rat trying to get through my tent. When it comes to critters, we don't just want to think about mice or rats, we also need to think about mosquitoes and bugs. And so being in a shelter, it isn't really a enclosed cabin. It's a 3-walled building, right? And so because of that, as you're sleeping in the shelter, you will be subject to mosquitoes and bugs. And in the summertime, we already have to deal with bugs eating us up while we're hiking. And that is the last thing that I personally would want while sleeping, and having bugs, try to have a feast on me all night long. When you're in a tent, usually a tent has a mosquito or a bug net, and that helps you be protected from the bugs and the mosquitoes. And last but not least, when it comes to critters, shelters do attract bears. Bears become familiar with the smells and the fact that there's people, and a lot of people do unfortunately leave trash. And so once a bear becomes familiar with that environment, they tend to hang around a lot. So if you are afraid of coming across a bear, then a shelter would not be the right choice, just because it is a place that does attract bears. Once again, you can hang your bear bag, you can put your bear bag in a bear box. Unfortunately, you cannot control other hikers, and there are a lot of people that do leave their trash, a lot of people that do cook in a shelter, and smells just remain. It's just a matter of fact. And so a shelter environment is more likely to attract the bears. And that's really it when it comes to the pros and the cons of staying in a shelter versus a tent. As I said already, I really do prefer a tent. When I decided to do my thru hike, I really wanted to be in peace, quiet, having my own space. A tent truly allows you to do that. Yes, you're just surrounded by sil nylon and Dyneema, but it does give you that feeling of having your own little home versus being in a shelter and being next to a lot of people. I could talk about the fact that being in close proximity to strangers could be dangerous, because there are people that could be dangerous, but honestly, the Appalachian Trail really isn't that dangerous, and I didn't really think of mentioning that too much because that's not really the case. Thank you so much for watching. If you do enjoy this kind of content, I do tend to post videos about hiking, through hiking, and backpacking, and stealth camping. And so if that's your kind of thing, do please consider subscribing, as that really, really helps me. And to those that have followed me from the beginning, thank you so much, and stay tuned for some really great stuff coming up.